Hello and welcome to the Poison Pen. I'm John Charles, and tonight we're delighted to have with us three extremely talented mystery writers, Rob Osler, Jennifer Ashley, and Dianne Freeman. For those tuning in virtually, we will have copies of the author's new book signed and available for purchase. If you'd like one, give us a call or go online. After the event, we'll be happy to hold one for you or put it in the mail. For tonight's program, we're going to do things just a little bit differently. After I introduce our authors, Diane's going to take over, ask them some grilling questions, and then we'll allow some time for any questions you might have. So let's go ahead and welcome Rob, Jennifer, and Dianne. You're on, Dianne.
Oh, you're not going to introduce them?
That's enough introduction. We'll get to know you as the
We all know
program
who
goes
you are.
forward.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to leave it to you two. The grilling will begin. I'd like you guys to tell us about the book that brought you here, or if you want to, about the series. And do you want to start, Rob, since she's handing you the mic?
Okay, well, I'll start. Hi, my name's Rob. I write the Harriet Morrow Investigate series. That's the second book, The Case of the Murdered Muckraker. The first book was The Case of the Missing Maid, which came out about a year ago. The series features a young female detective named Harriet Morrow, who the book one starts on her first day at the agency of the Prescott Detective Agency. So she's finagled her way to not be a secretary or a receptionist at the agency, but the first detective at the agency. And she goes about solving crimes in Chicago. The time period is the Progressive Age in America, the Progressive Era, which is 1890 to 1920. And she does her sleuthing by bicycle. She races across the city of Chicago by bicycle, and she does some of her sleuthing as Harry, under disguise.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Ashley. The book that brought me here today is this one here called A Silence in Belgrave Square, and that came out last August. This is, I believe, book 8 of the series, and book 9 will be out this coming August. And the series is called Below Stairs Mysteries, and the sleuth is a cook in Mayfair, London in the 1880s, and she is a professional cook, but she keeps stumbling over dead bodies and has to investigate the crime, as you do. And she has friends upstairs and friends downstairs, and people say it's like Downton Abbey with a mystery. And I suppose it's kind of like that. And I've been writing this for a few years, and I also have some other series that I do as well.
What number book is this?
This is book 8.
Okay. I know I am a big fan of historical mystery. It's pretty much my go-to read. It's my comfort read. It's what I really enjoy. But I'm wondering, what brings you to historical mystery? What made you decide what is it about the past that pulled you in and made you decide that you wanted to write a historical mystery?
Well, I'll start. Well, I've always been interested in historical novels, and like you, historical mystery is my go-to. At one point in my life, I said, I will read any mystery as long as it's historical. So when I started writing, I just naturally gravitated to that. And I just am interested. I've always been interested in history. Even when I was a little girl, and I read Laura Ingalls Wilder and Little Women and all her books, and so I was always very conscious of the past, and I also like historical architecture and interior design and furnishings and things. I've always been interested in antiques. I don't have any antiques, but I've always been interested in them, and so the architectural styles and periods have always been very interesting to me. And I also one weird thing I do is I build doll houses, and that involved when I first got into it, involved a lot of period research, because that was very popular to recreate period rooms. So when I first started, it's different now, but so that also got me interested in history. So I just naturally gravitated toward it.
Yeah, I came at it from a really interesting angle. I was born and raised in Boise, Idaho. And when I was running along the Greenbelt, visiting my family once, I got to the end of the Greenbelt, and there was a plaque, and it said, "Here once stood the natatorium." And it was this incredible Gothic building, which is like a swimming pavilion, but it was like a cathedral to swimming back in the late 1800s. So it was the setting. And in my mind, as I was looking at this etched, bronze plaque where the natatorium once stood, I was like, that would be a great place for a murder mystery. And so that was the impetus of then writing this book called The Case of the Murder at the Nat, which features a young Harriet Morrow. That book may be book 6 or 7 in the series if we get that far. But that was, if you will, the inciting incident, was just seeing this building. And because it's historical, it's like, well, I guess I'm writing a historical. And ever since, it's been really fascinating. We were chatting before this event, before the event started, about just the interesting things you come across as kind of like a part-time historian in writing these books, and how today what's happening in the news and whatnot is so it's a different manifestation of the same social ills that the progressives were fighting in the late 1800s. So it was kind of a happy accident, and I really love writing the historicals now because I love the research.
You said you ran into a plaque that said, "Here was the natatorium."
Yeah.
Is the building gone?
It was made of timber, and so because it was a heated pool, it was actually the world's largest heated pool that was covered in the world, in Boise, Idaho, of all places. Well, the steam heat from the natural heated water rotted all the wood of the timber building, so it blew down in a windstorm. But it wasn't the windstorm so much that did it as, it was ready to be blown down at that point.
If you ever want to, there's a natatorium, and I want to say, I can look this up and tell you for sure, but I want to say it's in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I know it's in New Mexico. So if you ever wanted to get a look at one, they have theirs pretty well restored.
Yeah, there's actually a virtual reality experience that they've built. So if anybody's really fascinated by this, you can just Google Boise, Idaho natatorium, and you'll go, oh my God, he was not exaggerating. That place is crazy. It's really worth a look.
Yeah, having seen one, they're quite something. Yeah. Okay, Rob, while you have the microphone, let's stick with you. Where did Harriet Marle come from? How did you create her? What's the inspiration?
Yeah, so first off, the name, Harriet Morrow. Harriet Pruitt was my grandmother. Vera Morrow was my great aunt. And I grew up, I just had, there was no father in my life, so I just had mom. And so my mother is really the plucky detective. She's really the embodiment of Harriet. And then I borrowed the other two, prominent women in my life and my upbringing as the amalgam of her name. I wanted to do I don't know why, I knew I was going to write a woman detective. I wasn't interested in writing a man detective. I don't know why. I was. And fun fact is that she's a lesbian. So as a gay man, I was really interested in exploring her world and her life as a double outsider. Not only is she a woman in a world where everyone around her, including the women in the office, thinks she's entirely unsuitable for, thinking she can do this job. But she's also a very closeted, and there's a whole line of, chit chat about that of, she's a closeted lesbian in the 1890s, where the term really wasn't even in the vernacular, because people didn't even really consider, those people as, that they even existed. There weren't even terms to talk about that. So yeah, that's where Harriet Marle came from. I was just interested in her being a double outsider and tapping into that and navigating her own world and her own growth and coming to be the woman that she is, while she's also trying to accomplish this job that she's determined to do, but nobody thinks she's capable of doing.
And Kat Holloway?
Oh, goodness. Well, I actually wrote the first story in this series, like in the year 2000. I actually have a couple other series, and I write from the male point of view, so I can be an outsider as well. But for some reason, I do that very well. So I had a series, the Captain Lacey series, which I'm now working on book 18 of, even as we speak. Or at least I was before I came down here. But when I was first writing, I just had fallen so much in love with writing historical mystery. I said, I want to do one, but I'll do a woman instead. And I can't remember actually how I decided she would be a cook, but I said, you know, all the women sleuths are, you know, upper class ladies. A lot of them were. And I said, I really want to be like the opposite of that. So I came up with this cook, and Kat Holloway just kind of grew herself. She just came on the page and just told me what she was going to do, which she's a very decided person. So that's really where she came from. And then that story sat in a box for almost 20 years. And because I had other things to write, and I was writing this other series. And then one day, our water heater broke and flooded the house. And I had to clean out all the closets, and, you know, which was probably a good thing. But I found this box, and in the box I found this story. And I said, you know, this is not bad. So I finished the novella, and then my editor read it and wanted to do the series. So that's kind of how that, you know, weird roundabout way that came about.
That's awesome. Usually when I look at something that I wrote 20 years ago, it's like, oh, God, let's hope nobody ever sees this. You know?
Well, I did revise it a bit, yes.
But I think it was really clever to make her a cook. I don't know if you're really thinking about it or not, but it allows her, as you said, like my sleuth is upper class, but it allows her to move in circles that the upper class woman can't. And sometimes you need that. And Frances occasionally has to get her servants to do her sleuthing for her. But anyway, I'm going to answer this question too. I was always really fascinated with the American heiress, British lord type of thing. And when first time I saw Downton Abbey, I'm like, wait a minute, I think I know Cora's story. It's like she was from Cincinnati, or the heiress who was from Cincinnati, and I can't think of her name right now, but her story matched Cora's perfectly. I'm like, he took that. So I started reading about some of these other ones, and I had read Edith Wharton way back when. The Buccaneers was always one of my favorites, where the 4 young ladies go off with a governess to basically seek their fortune in marrying a husband. And they had the money, and the husband would hopefully have the title. And, you know, when I read those books, I thought, okay, that's kind of fun. But then I found out it was really a thing. In the last quarter of the 19th century, this was like a cottage industry. They had books that you could buy quarterly called, titled Aristocrats, who was available, what were their holdings, and it was just amazing. And I just thought, all right, I don't know what's going to happen to her, but I know my character is going to be an American heiress who really feels like she made a mistake in this marriage, and that's kind of where she came from. And I just find it fascinating where these characters, and like you said, they just make their own decisions, and you're stuck with it. You guys both have, or I guess your characters have to deal with the social structure, and we kind of did that a little bit with Kat being in service. But how does that kind of affect your novels? Can you kind of elaborate on that? And Harriet as well.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people object to my series because they say a cook wouldn't have time, or she wouldn't be able to do, solving crimes and things. And that is true. I mean, the servants worked all the time. I think that's a little bit elitist as well, because you're saying, you know, a cook would not have the intelligence to do this, and she really does. And I had to make sure that she was literate. A lot of servants in the 1880s were not in England. They were not a lot of them could read, but I made sure that she had learned. Her mother taught her, so that helps her a lot. And also, I do have to have her. She makes friends with the young woman who lives upstairs, who's the sister of in the first book is the sister of the person who hires Kat, and she's actually a cross-dressing lady. She will wear men's clothes for for fun, and you know, and she has friends who are lesbian as well. She is not, but her friends are. But she has this young lady Cynthia does have to help Kat, you know, talk to the upper class people. Sometimes she just doesn't have access. And Kat also has a boyfriend who is a delivery man part-time, but also he works covertly for Scotland Yard, doing like secret investigations. So that's another thing I kind of put in, so that she was not just on her own, because yeah, and I do have that conflict where she says, I really want to go out and question this person, but the mistress expects this elaborate meal that I have to get done, and I can't do it. So she has to, you know, fob off the things on other people, or just go without. So yeah, and it is tricky to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure one of the things that we all, you know, struggle with is, you know, trying to create these fantastic tales that are adventurous and entertaining and exciting, but are also believable, right? So happily, that Harriet was a detective at the time is not crazy to think, because about 30 years before, Alan Pinkerton of the famous or infamous, depending on which side of you want to look at it, history at that time, of Alan Pinkerton at the Pinkerton Agency hired this woman named Kate Warren. Probably some of the people in the audience are familiar with Kate Warren. And she was the first female detective. She was quite successful. He hired more, and they became known as the Lady Pinks. Unfortunately, she died quite early, 34 or so when she died early. And then the sons took over, William and Robert took over the agency, and they disbanded the Lady Pinks. I share that story because that Harriet was a detective. She was one of very few women detectives, but it's not crazy that she was. Okay, but now that she is a lady detective, first day, I'm going to reference book 1 quickly, The Case of the Missing Maid. It was really more a favor, and this isn't really a spoiler if you haven't read it, but that storyline is set up where the maid of the next door mansion to Mr. Prescott is missing. And so Mr. Prescott, is a favor to his wife, who's very fond of Pearl, who lives next door and is missing her maid, says, you go find the maid, and it's really just, you know, a little favor to this kind of wacky Pearl who lives next door. Well, that's the entry for why it's hopefully believable that she, you know, with no experience and just 21 and just been hired, would be given a case. In the case of the murdered muckraker, a muckraker has been murdered. You probably saw that coming, in a tenement, which is depicted on the cover. And because the tenements were filled with immigrants who are very distrustful of law enforcement and of men, Prescott decides, I'm going to send in a woman to try to befriend the women immigrants, and that will be, you know, hopefully get their tongues wagging. So again, I like the fact that Harriet is who she is and has very low expectations of everybody, because it allows her to move around the city and get people to talk to her that otherwise wouldn't if she were a man or if she, you know, exuded more experience.
Well, as you said, like her being a double outcast, with Harriet being a lesbian, there were actually laws against her.
Oh, I was going to say, because you were talking about cross-dressing, there was actually an ordinance, I think it was like 1427, outlawing in the city of Chicago at the time for men to dress as women and women to dress as men, punishable by a fine of $20 to $100, which is like $300 to like $3,000. And if you were a man, you'd probably get sent to jail and beaten. Right? So there were laws against this. So Harriet, who will only wear men's shoes because she pedals her bicycle and refuses to wear women's shoes, and also a bowler hat, over time, takes on more and more men's clothing, even though, she could be fined or put in jail for doing so, because she just, there's a line she will not cross, and pedaling in women's shoes is one of them.
Can't blame her. Can you imagine riding a bike in heels? Let's see. Oh, this is actually kind of maybe possibly a throwaway, but one thing I noticed is you both had anarchists in your book. Do you want to discuss that? You had the people, you don't remember.
One of them, weren't they trying to do something with the trains and Queen Victoria?
Yes. And what was the question? I'm sorry.
It actually isn't a question. I just thought it just struck me as, oh, wow, they both kind of have anarchist people that wanted Irish rule in your case. And then in your case, I'm not sure what it was they wanted, but they were getting ready to bomb something. Yeah. They just wanted to get rid of the guys in charge.
Yeah. Do you want?
The Jeff Bezos.
If you feel like discussing it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, again, one of the things that for me as an author is so entertaining is to look at the progressive era, coming out of the Gilded Age, excessive wealth, but the income disparity was off the charts, made possible by so many immigrants that, weren't paid a living wage and were put in tenement houses and had deplorable, living conditions, but they did all the work. And so coming out of that, you had a growing middle class that was able to kind of look right and left across society and go, maybe we should take care of some of this stuff, right? Hence the progressives, the progressive era. And so back to the question of the anarchists and the social radicals, they were all part of this social milieu that was saying, wow, you've got all of these robber barons and you have this excessive wealth. The real answer is not to make incremental change, but complete government overthrow, right? And there's many seminal events. One is like the Haymarket riot or the Haymarket affair, which is several years earlier, 1886. Anybody, historians, keep me. It's about that time, right? Where Carnegie actually had a mine, and he brought in Pinkerton agents to, club the union workers and get them back to work. The anarchists, threw dynamite bombs and blowed up a couple of policemen, and then fast forward through the trials, and a number of anarchists who weren't even there were hung as being guilty parties. So it was all part of what was going on at the time with social strife and trying to basically create greater economic justice and greater judicial justice for people. Yeah,
I used that theme in a couple of the books in this series, including this one. The Irish Home Rule was a big question in England in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, it lasted all the way until Ireland finally gained their independence in the 20th century. But it was quite common for, it was the Fenians. And the Fenians actually were people who were Irish who moved to the United States, and then they in the United States would get the money there, and then they would come back to England and support the Irish separatists in England. And there was a lot of bombing of trains, and terrorism is not a new thing. It was happening then too. And in this book, I did take some real events. Scotland Yard got bombed, and that is part of the story. I don't want to spoil it, but it got blown up a little bit, and other things. And then the first book, the the Irish are trying to kill Queen Victoria, the anarchists. And she actually had quite a number of assassination attempts. And so my intrepid heroine and hero are trying to, stop that. So it's just it's such an integral part of that time period that, and that's one reason that her boyfriend gets hired on the Scotland Yard, is to help with this question.
That's what I think makes historical fiction so riveting, is that when you include what's actually going on at the time and it becomes part of the story. So I really, really enjoyed that from both of you. Was there anything that you discovered when you were writing these books that surprised you?
Yes. I think that the biggest, I don't know if I'd characterize it as a surprise, the biggest fascination is that history is repeating itself in different ways. And I'm just struck by every time I'm looking at an issue, and usually I'll pick the books around an issue. So like Muckraker is investigative journalist, for those unfamiliar with the term, but probably most of you are. And so at the time they were looking at issues of social justice, political corruption, environmental pollution, that sort of thing. And so I picked this issue of muckrakers and investigative journalism because it allowed me to explore those issues through, a historical lens and a distance of like 126 years that I couldn't get away with in a contemporary novel, because I think it would be such a bummer and people wouldn't read it. But that distance, right? I can have Harriet observing all of these social ills, and you're like, good Lord, what's going on? And then you look at the New York Times or, pick your poison, and you're like, good Lord, what's going on? And it's the same stuff, just manifested in a different way. And I've completely forgot the question, but it prompted a very fascinating response from me. I'm just kidding.
Well, I think I get surprised in every book. And I think one thing that happens to me is the series is set in London. It's a very London-centric series because my cook, really can't leave London. She has to go to work every day. So, and she's from London. She is a true Cockney because she was born within the range of Bow Bells in Cheapside. And I had the joy of going and seeing Bow Bells this summer and saying, look, this is where Kat Holloway was born. And I took tons of pictures, and I was, she lived in she lived in Bow Lane behind there, which is now kind of a shopping area, but so I got to shop as well. But I have old maps of London from, the 1800s, and just looking through them and just finding these places that some are still there and some have completely disappeared. They're just fascinating, these little lanes, and I mean there's just history on every corner. And so I often spend a lot of time researching that particular building, like the Goldsmiths Hall in one story, and I can't think of others right now, but I'm usually I just spend a lot of time on that street corner, on that building, and it does play into the story. And that history is just very fascinating.
Can I add one thing? I just thought of bloomers. So Harriet has discovered bloomers, and because they're much easier to ride her bicycle. But at the time, and bicycling was, so two things, big surprises. Bicycling in America in the 1890s was a super duper craze. There were 34 bicycle manufacturers in Chicago. The first bicycling convention was held in Chicago in the early 1890s, and it attracted 100,000 people. But for women to ride a bicycle at the time was scandalous. And there was a book put out, it's actually in a Crime Reads article that comes out on Thursday, and it's called Bicycling for Women, and it's a manual for women on like how to ride a bicycle. but it became a hugely liberating activity for women, and it was greatly embraced by the suffragist movement. And so that was a real fascination to me of like bloomers to bicycle riding is scandalous, but a real expression of liberation and how closely it was tied to the suffrage movement and women's seeking of rights. Bicycling.
Freedom, the ability to get around on your own. Makes sense. Similar to your first comment, which I can't remember what it was, about society's ills and the muckraker and all that. The book that I just most recently wrote is set in Paris, and I needed a charity. And I found the Daughters of Charity, which were, at that point in time, kind of linked with St. Vincent de Paul Society. And they did some really amazing works. I don't know how they did outside of Paris, but within Paris, they would help you find, if you were poor, they would help you find housing. They would help you get food. They would help you train for a job. They would help you find a job. They actually had nurseries where if you were a working woman, you could safely leave your children to go to work. And it was like amazing. But it was a meeting of people who were concerned enough about the problem to invest their time with people who were concerned enough about the problem to invest their money. And it worked out really, really well. It was not self-sustaining. It really did need contributions. And the government hated it. And for a strange reason, the reason was we fought 3 revolutions. What is it about our government? Why are we failing these people? That's our job. Why aren't we doing it? And so they worked really hard to basically make the Daughters of Charity unnecessary, which really, given today and not even just today, but the past 20, 30, many years, it just struck me as like, wow, that's really something. And I don't know that they ever did do it because 2 wars cropped up and everybody's economic situation changed. But that really shocked me. I'm like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Actually, there was something kind of similar in Muckraker. Wasn't it the tenement houses in Jane Hull?
Hull House.
Hull House, yeah.
Very true. Okay, I'm working on copy edits right now, and I just finished them, sent them in, and it's kind of my favorite thing to do because this is like the last time. I haven't seen the book in like 5-6 months, and they just send this to you and say, have at it. And with fresh eyes, I'm looking through this and going, oh gosh. And I've actually deleted scenes. I do so much work and so much manipulation during copy edits, and I know that the next time I see this book, they're going to say, don't change anything, you can correct a spelling, but that's about it, so it's like my favorite time. So what is your favorite piece of either writing, what part of writing or even publishing is your favorite thing?
Oh gosh. I like certain things about each process, like the first draft. I'm really not worried about how pretty everything is and how neat, and I don't outline. I just get in there and I just go. And then it's both freeing and it's also frustrating because sometimes I get stuck and go, what's next? And so I enjoy that, but I also enjoy the revision, which is nobody gets to see my rough drafts ever for any reason. No. But I like revising because it kind of takes that roughness and it makes it the book it was meant to be. So I enjoy doing that. And I do kind of like doing the edits as well because, when it comes back from the editor and I go through it. But there does come a point where I say, okay, I'm so done with this book. Can we just move on? But I do enjoy, and then I enjoy being done with it, and then I start the next book because then there's all those possibilities.
This is the easiest question for me. It's like I love reading the research that goes into the book. This may seem like another answer to your question before, like what you find surprising. But again, muckraker, investigative journalism, political corruption. There was a group of aldermen at the time known as the Grey Wolves, so called because of their preying on the defenseless public. There were two. This is real stuff. There were two aldermen in the first ward, which was home to the Levy district, the red light district, and they were known as Hinky Dink John Kenna and Bathhouse Mike Coughlin. And he's called Bathhouse John because he used to be a masseuse at one of the bathhouses in the Levy district. And he was a colorful dresser and lots of jewelry, and they were absolute criminals. And they would host an annual ball in the Levy district that was notorious for ending in an orgy. And there were like 5,000 people who attended this thing. This is real stuff. So in my book, right, I'm like, okay, I got to have a couple of those guys. So I've got Irish Dan and Saloon Mickey, Michael Powers, as two of these aldermen that Harriet is confronting and going, did they have something to do with this? But I couldn't have come up with them if I hadn't done all of this reading and research and go, wow, that is crazy stuff. It's it's truer than you couldn't. It's the classic. You couldn't make it up. And then I twist it and figure out how to shove it into the book.
You didn't have the ball in there, though.
No, I didn't. Cozies it's not a cozy per se, but
Traditional mysteries, yeah.
I didn't feel like I needed to go that far.
Okay. All right, fine. Secondary characters. We were talking about this a little bit before we sat down. And I got to tell you, Rob, you had a situation or a phenomena where the second book, I liked your second book even better than your first. And I think it's possibly because, oh, really?
Alone.
Oh, okay.
My editor and agent, the second book's a lot better. I was like, okay, that's great.
There was nothing wrong with the first book. The first book won awards. It was a great book.
I already bought the first book, so now you can.
But I think it was because the secondary characters really kind of came to life a little more in this one. So how do you decide what you need in a secondary character? And as we were talking about, when do you decide it's like, I really can't use this character in this book. They're going to have to sit this one out.
Well, when you mention secondary characters within Muckraker, I just go right to Brunhilde Struff, who was not in the outline. We have this. Do you have John as your editor? So we share an editor at Kensington Publishing, and so I'm also guessing you have to give him outlines. Yes. All right, so after outlines, Brunhilde Struff was not in the outline for this book, but she just was. These characters sometimes are just walk-ons. You just kind of create them in your mind. You give them a crazy name. And she just became larger and larger and larger in her presence. And then she became integral to the plot. And I was thinking, oh, I wonder if I should tell him, surprise or just develop the whole manuscript and just see what he thinks.
What'd you do?
I surprised him. But I felt like, the murder is still... the guilty people are kind of still guilty, and a lot of it's the same, but she wasn't even in the outline. Because I do find sometimes to just create the texture and the different kinds of people, the different kinds of characters, and the different kinds of suspects, right? Because you can't have them all be like A and B and C. You need some Z's and Q's and some really wacky people. And that was Brunhilde Struff.
A lot of my secondary characters just kind of show up, and I say, okay, who's this person? What's their deal? And many times I go back to my other series, the Captain Lacey Regency Mysteries. There was a character named James Dennis who was he was a criminal, and in the first book he was just kind of, the main suspect. Lacey was really sure he did all this stuff, but he didn't, and I thought that was it. He wasn't going to come back. Well, he's become very, very popular, and he comes back in book after book after book, and he's grown and developed, and he's just become, he kind of just walked in and took over. But that's what he would do anyway. But that happens to me a lot with a secondary character. And the problem is, I'm on book 18 of the Captain Lacey. I'm on book 9 of this one. And then I have a Gladiator series I'm on writing book 4 on. And the problem is you get more and more of these secondary characters and they keep showing up, and it's like you can't put them in every book. You have to decide who stays and who goes. And they don't have to, necessarily disappear forever or die or something, but you have to decide who gets the stage time. And it's tricky.
They all have different personalities and different skills, so it kind of is like, as you're writing the story, you kind of tend to know who you need. I had a situation like you did, where I sent in an outline, and it's for the next book, the book that's coming up.
So not the Christmas book.
The Christmas book,
The
the book
Christmas
that's coming up, yeah. And I thought that it would work really well, but it was Christmas, and it's all about family. And I can't have my sleuth and her husband just trotting off away from family, and doing their sleuthing. So I ended up coming up with a reason why George Hazleton is not there. He's gone. Well, he's in the beginning, but he has to go away. In fact, all the men in the town have to go away. And it brings all the women, or, Frances and Aunt Hetty and Fiona are going to be doing the investigating. And they're trying really hard to keep the kids out of it. But it turned into a so much better book than what I sent him the outline. But it was so different than what I sent him that I didn't dare surprise him. I said, okay, it changed. Here's a new outline. And he was good with it.
This idea of having to send in an outline,
Yeah.
I would die. My editor knows better than to ask me for an outline.
You don't outline then on your own. Uh-huh.
One thing I try to do and think about, like for the secondary characters, so like Pearl is the next door neighbor who's her elderly friend, and then her brother Aubrey, and then her confidant at the agency, another young agent, Matthew McCabe, is if they weren't in the story, could Harriet still solve the mystery? Right, so they have to have some role in driving the plot and helping her solve the crime. If I could pull them out and she could still go about her business, then I don't want them in. Then I want to pull them. They have to drive the story.
But sometimes you have the wrong character. I had, in book 7, I had Frances's sister in there because she lives in France, so what the heck. It made sense to have her for that reason, but she was not driving the plot. She was like a character I kept putting aside. And I went, okay, wait a minute. She doesn't need her. She needs her friend instead. So I had to come up with a reason to bring the friend there because she did then drive the plot forward. So as you gather more characters, because every book you end up with new secondary characters and you can't use them all, but it's nice to know who has what skill and where they'll work.
I'm going to interject now and ask a couple questions, and we'll take some from the audience, because my next question for each of you is one that drives booksellers and librarians crazy. You're all writing series, and there are readers who will not read books out of order, but theoretically, you're writing each book as a separate installment or edition or case. Can you talk about the challenges in writing one complete book, but being part of 9 books, 10 books, 3 books, 6 books? I'll go with you, Rob, first.
Well, the first thing that came to mind when you were answering the question is something my agent said when I was writing the second book, which is, remind readers who started with book 1 what happened, what they need to know, only what they need to know. And here's the key part, she said, and I'll never forget it, do it with dispatch. And it was just such a specific way to say it and use that word dispatch. And I think it served me really well. And so whenever I remind, again, readers who have started the journey with book 1 of, and remember, I don't say it that way, but, you slip in little facts of the case with the missing maid. I do it with dispatch and just but you're right. I mean, we're all trying to write. If you come in at the second book, Muckraker, you can read it and hopefully have an enjoyable, complete, pleasurable experience without having read one. I think it's maybe a fuller experience if you go 1, 2, 3, etc. But yeah, do it with dispatch.
I like that. Yeah, it's hard for me sometimes because sometimes I think book one isn't the best book. I think, the series didn't really start to get rich and full until book 3 or 4 or something. So now, personally, I will start a series on book 14. I don't care. I just want to read the story, and then if I'm really interested, I will go back and read the others. But yeah, a lot of people won't do that. They only want to start with book 1, and I try to make each book kind of significant on its own, a complete story that you really don't have to read the others to understand. I mean, you can only do that so much. But I have gotten the compliment where people say, I read this out of order, but I didn't feel lost. I knew, I got it. So I've managed to do that without, going on and on and on about what happened to book 1 or book 2 or whatever, out over explaining.
That isn't easy to do because you remember everything. Oh. But if a character walks on, you know who this character is and you know what their relationship is to the main character. So that's kind of probably the best way to look at it, is you're just giving one thing an editor told me was background instead of backstory. You just what's their relationship and only what you need to know. But one thing that really does drive me crazy is if I have to describe my main character one more time. It's like, as I write in first person, so she's describing herself, essentially. And how many ways can you do that? It's just, gosh.
Because you do have to do it every time. You do, right?
Because some people don't know.
It's like, what does she look like? It's like, how can I do this again? So it's like interesting.
Before we turn it over to the audience, my last question is, tell us, if you'd like, what's coming next from you as an author. And Jennifer, you're bringing something back that I loved, a historical fiction series.
Yes, and we have it here tonight. It's called Eloise and the Queen, and it is a historical fiction. There's a little bit of mystery in that and a little bit of romance, but it's mostly a historical novel. And it was a book that was published many, many years ago, and I completely rewrote and revised it and published it as Eloise and the Queen. And it's about Princess Elizabeth before she became Queen Elizabeth and the hardships that she went through, told from the point of view of her seamstress. And I did so much research on this book. I did more on the revision than I ever did before the first book, and a lot has changed. There's been a lot more fresh research and archaeology about the period and about Elizabeth herself. And I'm so fascinated by it that I'm going to continue it as a series and write a book too of the next stage of Elizabeth's life, because just a lot happened to her, and it's she lived a long time, and she was just a very fascinating person. And I did see where there was kind of a rumor that went around during her time that she was actually a man, and that she was like an adopted boy or something, and why they would raise her as a woman, I don't know. But and then book 9 of this series is coming out in August. It's going to be called Murder in Blackfriars. And I am working on a Captain Lacey mystery, book 18, which should be out in March. And then there'll be another Leonidas the Gladiator probably in the summer.
Rob?
Busy. About a year from now, I suspect, will be book 3 in Harriet Marrow Investigates series, The Case of the Swindled Suffragist. Oh. I don't have to say, usually I can just say the title and you kind of get the gist of what's happening. Swindled Suffragist. Although Ida B. Wells makes a guest appearance, which is really fascinating. Mm-hmm. The whole Ida B. Wells story and how she plugs into suffragists. It's very interesting. And then a year after that, about, I suspect, I'm halfway through writing it, is the case of the silent stevedore, based on the amazing fact, talk about shitty behavior. Back in the day, in 1900, the city of Chicago reversed the direction of the Chicago River. Do you guys know this? Wow. They actually reversed. And why? Because the drinking water was from Lake Michigan. Well, they also had like the Union Stockyards, made famous by Upton Sinclair and the Jungle, right? So they would throw all of their everything bad into the lake and the river, and so the city leaders decide, I know how we'll solve this problem. We'll just send it all to Missouri, right? We'll just reverse the flow of the river, and they spent tens and tens of millions of dollars in that day and 14 years digging by hand a trench to create a canal, the sanitary canal, and reverse the flow of the river. So it's silent stevedore. Basically, when they did that, the churn of the river reveals a body, and there you go. And then I was just mentioning to John before we started, because we were talking about butlers or something, but I have a contemporary novel that was sold as a standalone, but it's become a series that will come out a year from this summer, called The Butler, and features an unreliable contemporary executive butler whose zeal for order and discipline has lethal consequences.
Ooh, I like that.
Diane?
Let's see. My next one is A Christmas Guide to Family and Murder. And I told you a little bit about it, but with the title, now you know why I had to involve the whole family. George and Frances are back in England. They've been in France for a while. And they're going to the country, to George's sister's husband's country estate, just to celebrate the holidays with family. Everybody is excited because they're going to Norfolk and there's going to be snow, and they can't wait, and they have no snow. It's like 50 degrees in London. And except they get there, and instead of snow, they get a gale, and it is very destructive. It's caused a lot of damage. And so the chief of police goes around and sees who he can gather up to come out and help open the roads and get the gasworks working again and things of that nature. And so both George and Fiona's husband volunteer, and they go. And after they leave, the ladies of the house with the children go off to the village to see if there's anybody in need of help. And as they're headed there, they literally trip over a body. And it's the coroner, and he's dead. So now they have no chief of police, no constables, no coroner, and Fiona's husband is the magistrate. So they have no choice but to try and solve this crime themselves.
Wow. Any questions for our authors from the audience?
Based on what you're discussing about secondary characters, do you keep a catalog, or how do you keep track of them over these extended series?
For me, I'm really fortunate that my copy editor does that. She when she sends me copy edits, she sends like every character and little bits about them. Somebody has blue eyes, so, and anything that I've described, she'll put in there. And so I save that, and then I combine them over the books, because you do forget. And I did make a mistake, but it was, the books were so close together, it was too late to fix it. Last year I came out with a novella in the spring, and my book comes out in the summer. And in the novella, I spelled one of the characters' names wrong. So then she wasn't in book 8, so now she's in book 9, and it's like, well, pick one. So you still have problems, but that works out really well for me.
Yeah, style sheets are very happy. I have a running. I write my books in a program called Scrivener, and on the side you can keep a lot of files and things. And I have a file on all my books and all my series that say cast of characters, and it's got a list of every character and who they are and who they're related to for the whole series. And it's just a running list. And every time I do a book, I just add to it.
Both of those things.
Other questions? I think they're ready to have you sign books. So we're going to go ahead and say thank you. Let's welcome and appreciate our authors with a round of applause for being here tonight. Thank you, virtual audience, for joining us. If you give us a few minutes, we'll get our authors situated to sign books. There's copies up front. We're going to put probably Jennifer back at the table there, and we'll have Rob and Dianne up here, but give us a few minutes to do that. Thank you.